In the cold winter of 1847, the quiet town of Millbrook, Kentucky, uncovered a secret that would haunt the Ohio River Valley for many generations. Hidden below the respected Sullivan Medical Institute was a maze of rooms that held the preserved bodies of over 60 individuals, men, women, and children, who had disappeared from the area over the previous 15 years. Officials discovered detailed surgical records written in the careful handwriting of Dr. Cornelius Sullivan, describing procedures that no decent doctor would ever dare perform on a living person. What shocked investigators the most wasn't just the horrifying experiments, but the fact that many of the victims had come to Dr. Sullivan for help with simple health problems: headaches, stomach pains, insomnia, illnesses that should never have needed such extreme treatment as described in his journals. The Kentucky State Medical Board buried the full findings, and for almost 200 years, the real extent of Dr. Sullivan's activities stayed hidden in locked archives. Before we go deeper into the story of Dr. Cornelius Sullivan and the patients who had trusted him with their lives, it's important to understand that the Sullivan family name had long been connected with healing in Millbrook since the town's founding in 1823. Millbrook, Kentucky, rested like a forgot gem beside a curve in the Ohio River, where steamboats would stop to pick up tobacco and grain heading to New Orleans. By 1832, the town had nearly 800 people, most of them hard-working farmers, shop owners, and river hands who had built steady lives on the rich land near the river. The town took great pride in its solid brick courthouse, its tall spired Methodist church, the highest structure within 50 miles, and most of all, its medical institute. Dr. Cornelius Sullivan came to Millbrook in 1831, a well-dressed gentleman in his early 40s, with streaks of silver in his hair and a calm confidence that quickly earned respect. He said he had studied medicine at top schools in Philadelphia and Edinburgh. He brought with him a rare collection of surgical tools and medical books, the kind few doctors on the frontier could afford. Soon after arriving, he opened the Sullivan Medical Institute in a large, 3-story brick building on Main Street. It included private rooms for patients, a modern surgical room, and what he described as his research lab located in the basement. People in town were amazed by Dr. Sullivan's advanced views on medicine. Unlike traveling doctors who still used old methods like bloodletting and purging, Sullivan spoke of new treatments based on studying the body directly and working on the nervous system. He often took in patients for weeks at a time to watch their progress. Many thought his results were nothing short of miraculous. Chronic pain disappeared. Mental illnesses improved. Strange conditions cleared up completely. Dr. Sullivan lived quietly in rooms above the institute with his teenage daughter, Margaret, a pale and serious girl who helped with his work and rarely took part in town gatherings. The doctor told others his wife had died in a yellow fever outbreak in New Orleans, and that his deep commitment to medicine came from being unable to save her. Townspeople admired his sorrow and praised his efforts to stop such heartbreak for other families. What the people of Millbrook didn't ask too closely was why so many of Dr. Sullivan's most impressive recoveries seemed to involve people from out of town. Travelers, drifters, and troubled folks whose absence would not draw quick attention or worry from local officials. The first real sign that something wasn't right came in late October 1846, when a respected tobacco merchant, Thomas Hendricks, approached Sheriff Benjamin Carmichael with a troubling concern. Hendricks' younger brother, Robert, had been suffering from strong headaches and moments of confusion after falling from a horse the spring before. Dr. Sullivan had suggested a 2-week treatment at the institute, promising that Robert would come out fully healed. That was 6 weeks ago, Sheriff, Thomas said, his hands shaking as he spoke. Every time I ask about Robert, the doctor tells me the treatment is going well. But I haven't seen him. Not once. He says family visits might slow the healing. Sheriff Carmichael, a steady man who had known the Hendricks family for many years, decided to stop by the institute without warning. On a cloudy morning in November, he found Dr. Sullivan calmly reviewing patient notes in his office. The doctor welcomed him politely, saying that Robert was resting and still too weak for visitors. "I understand your worries, Sheriff," Sullivan said. "But seeing family too soon could undo all the progress we've made. The mind needs peace to heal, maybe in another week or so." But something had already unsettled Carmichael. Through a crack in the office door, he noticed Margaret Sullivan scrubbing the hallway floor near the basement stairs. The water in her pail was tinted with a rusty brown color, something that looked too much like dried blood. And though she was using lye to clean, a heavy smell of rot still rose from below. That night, the sheriff came back under cover of darkness, this time without knocking. The building looked deserted except for a faint glow in the basement. Walking carefully to the back, he found a small window at ground level and peered inside. What he saw in the dim light would haunt him forever. Dr. Sullivan stood at a table in a blood-splattered apron, cutting into what was clearly human tissue. Around him were jars holding preserved organs. The walls were covered with drawings of the human body. Just beyond the reach of the lamp's light were several more tables, each holding a still figure under a white sheet. The sheriff's breath caught in his throat. On the main table, he recognized the red hair and strong build of Robert Hendricks. Word of what Carmichael had seen spread quickly through Millbrook, but the town's first reaction wasn't what he had expected. Instead of anger, many showed doubt and even defended the doctor. He had saved too many lives, healed too many diseases, and brought too much comfort to be easily accused of such horrors. And Thomas Hendricks has been drinking more since Robert went missing, whispered Mrs. Adelaide Prescott to her friends. And everyone knows the sheriff has never gotten along with Dr. Sullivan, especially after that argument about how the cholera outbreak was handled. When the town council quickly called a meeting, Dr. Sullivan appeared sincerely confused by the accusations. He said he had been doing medical research using cadavers bought from schools in Louisville. Robert, he said, had died of brain fever despite their best efforts. He admitted he had not shared the sad news, hoping to find a treatment that could save others in the future. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice filled with what seemed to be true regret, "I know this looks frightening to those who don't understand modern medicine. But every step I've taken was meant to improve how we treat sickness. If my ways seem unusual, it's only because traditional methods have failed so many who deserved a second chance." The town council agreed to let him keep working, but under tighter watch. He now had to provide detailed records of every patient and every treatment. Most people in town were relieved, wanting to believe their trusted doctor, and his cooperation made many think the worst was over. But Sheriff Carmichael wasn't convinced. He couldn't forget what he had seen that night through the basement window. And Robert's death was only the start of his own quiet investigation into the Sullivan Institute. Over the next several months, he began to notice patterns the rest of the town had ignored or forgotten. Between 1832 and 1846, 37 patients had been taken in at Sullivan's Institute for extended treatment. Out of all of them, only 14 had ever made it back home to their families. 23 were said to have died during their treatment, a death rate that would have caused public outrage if those deaths had taken place in the town of Millbrook itself. But most of Sullivan's dead patients had been wanderers, seasonal laborers, or people from far-off places. Their deaths were mentioned in letters sent to families who never visited Millbrook to check for themselves. Sheriff Carmichael also learned that Dr. Sullivan had been exchanging letters with medical schools in cities like Louisville, Cincinnati, and even distant Baltimore. He had ordered anatomy books, surgical tools, and various supplies, much more than what a small-town doctor would normally need. The doctor's financial records showed regular payments to unidentified vendors, marked only as research supplies and anatomical samples. But the most disturbing thing Carmichael uncovered was that Dr. Sullivan had been placing ads in newspapers across Kentucky and southern Indiana. These ads targeted people suffering from long-term illnesses, mental disorders, or conditions that regular doctors had given up on. The ads promised groundbreaking treatments based on the latest European medical science and encouraged patients to plan for long stays at his well-equipped institute. As the winter of 1847 set in deeper, Sheriff Carmichael began getting visits from families throughout the region. They all came with different versions of the same terrible story. A loved one had gone to see Dr. Sullivan for help and never came back. Samuel Turner, a riverboat captain from Madison, Indiana, talked about how his 19-year-old son David had fallen into deep depression after his fiancée died. Local doctors had advised rest and prayer, but Dr. Sullivan's ad in the Madison Courier offered expert treatment for mental and nervous system issues. David traveled to Millbrook in August 1845, planning to stay for just 2 weeks. His father received a letter, dictated by Dr. Sullivan, saying David was doing better but needed more time. After that, nothing. I came to Millbrook 3 times, Turner said, his weathered face marked by sorrow. Every time, Dr. Sullivan told me David was getting better, but wasn't ready to see anyone. He even showed me letters he said were written by David, but the writing didn't seem right. When I demanded to see him, Sullivan said David had been moved to a special hospital in Louisville. But I checked every place in that city. No one had ever heard of my son. Mrs. Edelina Dawson from Bardstown had sent her 16-year-old daughter Catherine to Sullivan for what other doctors called female hysteria. Terrible headaches and fainting spells that began after she witnessed a runaway horse accident. Sullivan had promised that his treatments for the nervous system would cure such problems for good. That had been in June 1844. Mrs. Dawson received 2 letters, supposedly from Catherine, describing how her treatment was helping. Then came silence. The last letter said she felt much better. Mrs. Dawson whispered, tears running down her face. It said Dr. Sullivan was teaching her about anatomy, and that she might become his assistant. But Catherine always fainted at the sight of blood. There's no way she could have helped in a surgery room. Every family told a similar tale. Their loved one left full of hope. At first, there were letters that gave reassurance. Then the letters stopped. Finally, they were told their loved one had either passed away during care or been moved to another clinic, one that no one could ever find. Sheriff Carmichael began to understand the pattern. Dr. Sullivan had built a perfect system to bring in vulnerable people. He chose patients who were desperate for help, whose families lived too far to visit often, and whose vanishing could be explained with believable medical excuses. These explanations discouraged families from asking too many questions. But Carmichael started to believe that what was happening at Sullivan's Institute was even bigger and more organized than anyone could imagine. The basement lab he had briefly seen might only show a small piece of the larger truth. The building itself was big enough to hide much more. And Sullivan's daughter, Margaret, seemed to know far more about her father's strange work than she let on. On a freezing February night, Sheriff Carmichael made a decision. He would return to the Sullivan Medical Institute, but this time with help. He brought his deputy, James Whitfield, and Dr. Augustus Brennan, a retired Army doctor who had recently moved to Millbrook and had quietly voiced doubts about Sullivan's methods. The 3 men approached the building at midnight. The place looked dark, except for the faint, familiar glow from the basement windows. Using a key Carmichael had gotten from the building's original builder, they entered through a back door and stepped into a narrow hallway leading to the first-floor treatment rooms. The building felt wrong from the moment they stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of chemicals, formaldehyde and something else, something rotten and alive. The wooden floors had dark stains that someone had tried to scrub away, but never quite removed. From downstairs they heard faint sounds. Metal scraping, glass clinking, voices, low and urgent. Dr. Brennan checked several of the treatment rooms and found they were fitted with devices meant for restraint. Iron cuffs were fixed to the walls, and the windows had bars that could only be opened from outside. The beds had leather straps designed to tie patients down completely. "These aren't treatment rooms," Dr. Brennan whispered. "They're cells." In Dr. Sullivan's office, Sheriff Carmichael found a locked cabinet filled with patient records that revealed the full horror of what was going on. Each file included not just health notes, but also anatomical drawings, bone measurements, and details about strange procedures. Some of these included surgeries to remove organs and something Sullivan called brain mapping, done through cutting directly into the tissue. The file for one man, Robert Hriss, had 17 pages of notes describing operations done while the patient was still awake. There were detailed notes about how different brain parts reacted to electrical shocks and cuts. Sullivan had even written down what Hriss said during each part, creating what looked like a map of human awareness and pain. But it was Margaret Sullivan's file that shocked the men the most. Unlike the others, hers was labeled primary resistant subject. The papers described how Sullivan had used his own daughter as a test subject since she arrived in Millbrook. The quiet, pale girl who helped with his clinic work had been operated on repeatedly to support his twisted ideas about human mind and body function. There were detailed drawings of surgical scars on Margaret's body, notes about how she reacted to drugs and chemicals, and plans for future experiments meant to improve how surgery could be used to change behavior and thought. It became clear that Margaret wasn't just helping with her father's work. She was part of it. She was the most advanced result of his experiments, reshaped and trained to serve his twisted goals. Deputy Whitfield then found a hidden door behind a bookshelf. It led to a narrow staircase going down to the basement. As they walked down, the smell of chemicals got worse, and the sounds from below became louder. Movement, voices, and metal instruments being used. What they found downstairs was worse than they ever imagined. The basement level took up the entire bottom of the institute. It was made up of several rooms linked by tight hallways. The main surgical room had 4 tables, each fitted with thick straps and stained with old blood. Jars lined the shelves, jars filled with preserved organs, body parts, and strange samples that looked barely human. There were cages in one room, actual cages. Some were empty. Others contained bedding and chains. A small journal found in that room listed patient numbers and dates, with notes about tolerance, resistance, and survival rate. Dr. Sullivan had been experimenting not only with surgeries, but with complete control over the human body and mind. Restraining straps lined the examination tables, surrounded by glass cases filled with preserved human organs. The walls were covered in anatomical diagrams showing human bodies divided into numbered zones, with handwritten notes detailing the best to reach different organ systems during surgery. Inside the preservation room, Sheriff Carmichael counted 43 glass jars, each containing human organs floating in chemical liquids. Many had labels with dates and patient initials, creating a chilling record of Sullivan's surgical activities over the last 15 years. Some jars contained full limbs, others held organs cut open to reveal inner structures. The labels made it clear. Sullivan had been harvesting organs from living patients to study how they worked. The most horrifying find was in what Sullivan called his brain research room. In there were 12 human heads, carefully preserved in large glass vessels. Each one was accompanied by detailed diagrams showing how Sullivan had examined different parts of the brain. The preservation was so complete that facial features were still visible, allowing some victims to be identified from family reports. David Turner's cleft chin was recognizable, as was Catherine Dawson's dark hair arranged neatly around her preserved face. Dr. Brennan was going through Sullivan's surgical journals when they heard footsteps on the stairs behind them. Dr. Cornelius Sullivan appeared, descending into the lab with an oil lamp in hand, wearing the same blood-stained leather apron Carmichael had spotted through the basement window months ago. Following him was Margaret Sullivan, moving in a stiff, unnatural way that suggested her father's surgeries had affected her movements. "Gentlemen, I must say I'm disappointed," Sullivan said softly, placing the lamp on the exam table. "I had hoped Sheriff Carmichael's earlier curiosity could be handled quietly, but it seems stronger measures are needed now." Margaret positioned herself at the staircase, blocking the exit. Sullivan continued in the same polite, her doctor-like voice he used upstairs. Her motions were smooth, but unnervingly exact, as though each one required effort rather than instinct. "You've uncovered the full scope of my work, and I'm sure you're feeling the usual reactions: shock, disgust, moral outrage. But understand this: what you see here is the future of medicine. Everything in this lab represents knowledge that will save lives and end pain for future generations. Every patient who helped this research has contributed to discoveries that will change the world." A Sheriff Carmichael noticed surgical tools laid out nearby. It looked like Sullivan had been preparing for another operation before they interrupted him. The instruments were placed with obsessive Kerrig scalpels, bone saws, clamps, and other strange tools clearly meant for procedures no ethical doctor would dare perform. "Dr. Sullivan," Deputy Whitfield said, his voice calm though the room was full of horrors, "these people came to you for help." "They trusted you." Sullivan's eyes brightened, almost with joy. What beautiful trust it was. "Do you know how rare it is to find people willing to be part of truly groundbreaking work? Traditional medical schools offer only corpses. Cold, dead tissue that teaches us nothing about living biology. But my patients gave something far greater: the chance to study the human body and mind in action." He approached one of the jars, gazing at it proudly. This liver came from a 43-year-old farmer who complained of constant tiredness. By exploring his body while he was still conscious, I learned more about how liver function connects to energy levels than anyone ever has. His role in science was far greater than anything he would have achieved on his farm. Dr. Brennan stepped forward, trying to stay composed. "Dr. Sullivan, this isn't medicine, it's torture. These people went through unbearable suffering. Dr. Brennan." Sullivan responded calmly, "Your military past may have shown you violence, but you never studied it. Pain is just a nerve response that can be altered. Watch." He nodded at Margaret. She rolled up her sleeve, revealing long scars on her arm. Sullivan picked up a scalpel and lightly cut across one scar. Margaret didn't flinch. Her face remained blank, showing no pain at all. By carefully adjusting her nerve systems and using the right chemicals, I removed her ability to feel physical pain. Yet her mind is untouched. She's the ideal assistant. She can help during long surgeries without being affected by feelings the way normal doctors are. Margaret spoke in a calm, strange voice. "The first procedures were uncomfortable, but Father explained the pain was temporary. Now, I can assist with medical research without letting emotions interfere with the process." Sheriff Carmichael realized they were young women speak whose emotions had been removed by her own father's experiments. The pale girl who once seemed merely shy had actually been turned into a test subject, her brain chemistry completely altered. Sullivan continued, sounding more excited. "Margaret is just the beginning. I've created techniques to remove certain emotions while keeping the mind sharp. I can increase pain tolerance or change parts of someone's personality if needed." He walked to another part of the lab, where Carmichael saw more exam tables. These had much more advanced restraints than he'd first noticed, clearly built to control a patient's exact position during surgery. Each was fitted with machines to monitor vital signs during long operations. David Turner, the young man from Madison who suffered from deep sadness, gave us remarkable knowledge about how the brain handles emotion. Sullivan explained, flipping through a leather-bound notebook filled with small, tidy writing. By carefully exploring his brain while he was still awake, I found the exact pathways that create constant sadness. I then developed ways to change those pathways, to erase depression entirely. "You mean you did brain surgery on a conscious patient?" Dr. Brennan asked, his voice tight with anger. I prefer the term neurological improvement, Sullivan replied. And yes, keeping him awake was crucial. It was the only way to know which changes were working. David stayed alert during every step and gave detailed updates on how he felt as I altered different brain regions. His help to science was priceless. While Sullivan spoke, Deputy Whitfield had been quietly exploring the lab. In a hidden side room behind thick curtains, he found something that stopped him cold. Sheriff, he called out, his voice low. You need to see this. The hidden room had 6 more exam tables, each with a living person strapped down. These patients were conscious, but couldn't speak or move properly. Their heads were partly shaved, with fresh bandages over recent cuts. Each one was tied tightly with leather straps. They watched the deputies with wide, terrified eyes, but couldn't speak. Their vocal cords had been altered. Sullivan noticed what they had found and smiled, seeming genuinely pleased. Ah, you found my ongoing cases. These patients are part of a long-term study in brain adjustment. Each one is at a different stage of development. I've been mapping how changes to different brain areas affect awareness, speech, movement, and emotion. A different experimental approach was being used to explore multiple theories about consciousness, how pain is felt, and the control of behavior. He walked over to one of the tables, glancing at the notes clipped to the patient's restraints. This man complained of ongoing insomnia when he first came in 3 weeks ago. I've been gradually altering the areas responsible for regulating sleep to see whether it's possible to remove the need for rest entirely. So far, the outcomes have been very encouraging, though he's shown a few surprising effects in terms of thinking and awareness. The man on the table, middle-aged with eyes that clearly understood what was happening, tried to speak but could only let out faint, garbled sounds. Sullivan had apparently harmed his vocal cords during one of the surgeries. And this young woman, Sullivan went on, stepping over to another table, came in asking for help with what she called a nervous temperament. I've been examining if modifying the amygdala through surgery can erase anxiety without disturbing other emotional responses. It's taken several rounds of adjustments, but I think we're very close to a breakthrough. Sheriff Carmichael began to understand that they had stumbled upon Sullivan's operation while it was still in progress. These weren't preserved bodies from earlier victims. They were witnessing ongoing torment under the mask of scientific research. People still alive and suffering from experiments that had lasted for weeks or even longer. Margaret Sullivan stepped up to one of the examination tables and started tightening restraints with a cold, methodical focus, as though she was simply adjusting tools in a clinic. Her father's procedures had removed her ability to feel physical pain and also wiped out her empathy for others. She had become essential for managing long-term research protocols. She can monitor patient vitals, maintain the surgical sites, and assist in operations without letting emotions interfere with scientific progress, Sullivan explained. She is the future of medicine. Doctors who can pursue knowledge without being slowed down by emotional distractions or unnecessary concerns about patient comfort. Doctor. Abrina moved closer to a conscious patient, a young woman whose fearful eyes silently begged for help, though she couldn't speak or move properly. Her body displayed signs of numerous surgeries, suggesting Sullivan had operated on her again and again over a long period. How long have you been holding these people? Dr. Brennan asked firmly. Sullivan looked over his notebooks with visible pride. My longest serving subject has been under observation for nearly 8 months. Her case has given me the chance to study what happens to the brain with continuous neurological changes over time. I've been able to slowly change parts of her personality and mental abilities, which has helped me map how surgery affects awareness and identity. The woman, likely in her early 20s, had dark hair and delicate features that might have once been lovely, but were now disfigured by the relentless experiments. A chart beside her bed labeled her as Subject N61, named Catherine, and listed months of brain procedures in great detail. She first came in seeking help for severe migraines, Sullivan noted. But her condition gave me a perfect chance to explore how pain is processed. I've carefully modified different brain pathways to find out which surgeries can block certain kinds of pain while keeping other senses intact. Her suffering has greatly added to our understanding of pain treatment. Catherine's eyes clearly showed she was aware of everything happening. She tried to communicate, but had lost control over her facial muscles and vocal cords. She was fully conscious, able to hear and see what was going on, yet trapped in a body she could no longer command. Sheriff Carmichael felt a wave of sickness as he began to grasp the scale of Sullivan's crimes. The doctor hadn't just been killing patients. He was keeping them alive to carry out detailed, lasting brain experiments. His victims were left aware and responsive while their minds and bodies were broken down piece by piece. The three of you offer unique research opportunities, Sullivan said casually, selecting tools from a nearby tray. Sheriff Carmichael, your role in leadership could help me understand the brain regions responsible for decision-making and authority. I'm especially curious whether those traits can be enhanced surgically, while removing bothersome things like morality. He then turned to Deputy Whitfield. Studying him with the same detached interest he showed toward any other test subject. As a law enforcement officer, you likely have good physical strength and resistance to stress. You'd be ideal for testing how much pain a person can tolerate and how behavior can be controlled under extreme pressure. Dr. Brennan backed away. But Margaret moved swiftly to cut off any escape routes. Her movements were precise and deliberate, proving that her training extended well beyond assisting in surgery. And you, Dr. Brennan, Sullivan added, with your military medical background, are of great value. I've been creating surgical methods that could improve trauma care on the battlefield by removing emotional reactions. Think of military doctors who never hesitate, who stay calm no matter how severe the wounds. No fear, no hesitation, just focus on survival. His disturbing idea of progress involved turning doctors into tools. Emotionless professionals who could carry out any operation in the name of science, unaffected by the pain of those they treated. The conflict that followed revealed just how far Sullivan had mentally unraveled and how thoroughly he had built this system of cruelty. When Sheriff Carmichael made a move for the exit, Margaret reacted instantly, using medical tools as weapons. Her actions were just as cold and calculated as her surgical tasks. It became clear that she had been trained not only to assist in operations, but also to protect the lab from threats. Dr. Brennan was able to release Catherine from the restraints, but her body no longer responded normally. The damage done to her nerves left her awake and aware, but unable to coordinate basic movements. She knew what was happening, but couldn't stop it. Sullivan, realizing that his entire life's work was at risk, fought back with fierce determination, even as he was being overpowered. He kept talking about his experiments, furious that others couldn't see their value. You're destroying 15 years of groundbreaking medical research, he shouted as Deputy Whitfield tied down his wrists. These people helped push neuroscience into a new age. You don't understand what you're throwing away. Future generations will see this work as the base of real, scientific medicine. Margaret also had to be restrained separately. What she did next showed the full horror of what her father had done to her. She didn't cry, panic, or fight back in the usual sense. She calmly observed what was happening and started thinking through how she could carry on her father's work from memory. She showed no signs of fear or sorrow, only clear thinking and determination, proving that her emotional responses had been erased. But her knowledge and skills were left untouched. Investigating the Sullivan Medical Institute required the combined efforts of local law enforcement, state authorities, federal agents, and expert doctors from universities all across the area. The case was more complex than anything any of them had dealt with before. Understanding the depth of Sullivan's crimes and the condition of his surviving victims required highly specialized medical knowledge. Dr. Marcus Fitzgerald, the top neurologist at the University of Louisville, has spent 3 weeks reviewing Sullivan's research journals and trying to make sense of the surgical methods he had created. His early report described techniques that explored human brain function in ways that showed advanced medical understanding, but also total neglect for the well-being of patients. In the end, the number of victims reached 89, ranging in age from 14 to 67. These victims came from families throughout Kentucky, Indiana, Ohio, Tennessee, and even as far as Illinois and Virginia. Sullivan's advertising outreach was more widespread than first believed, reaching towns across the Ohio River Valley and drawing in patients from areas far enough that family involvement was unlikely. Sullivan's precise and organized records gave investigators clear proof of experiments that went on for 17 years. They began with what looked like normal treatments, slowly changing into consistent torture under the name of science. His journals showed a clear shift from real medical innovation to acts of cruel scientific obsession. As each procedure brought what he saw as success, he moved to more extreme tests. Over time, he built a well-planned system for getting and handling victims. This included letters sent to families meant to stop visits, fake letters claiming to be from patients, and careful steps for getting rid of bodies when people died during the experiments. His entire operation showed a level of organization and planning that suggested cold intelligence rather than simple madness. Out of the 6 patients found still alive in Sullivan's lab, only 3 lived long enough to be treated by real doctors. The damage to their brains made full recovery impossible. Still, their accounts gave investigators valuable insight into Sullivan's practices and the organized nature of his actions. Catherine Morrison, a young woman who had gone to Sullivan for migraine treatments, survived for 6 weeks after being rescued. During her clear-minded moments, she was able to write notes explaining how Sullivan had kept her awake through surgeries, exploring different parts of her brain, and speaking about his ideas on pain, awareness, and how the brain works. These notes, which were added to court records, gave the clearest picture of his methods. "He cut into my head while I was awake," she wrote, touching different parts and asking what I could feel. "When I cried or begged him to stop, he told me my feelings were getting in the way of real science. He said the pain would pass, but the information would help everyone." Catherine's writings revealed that Sullivan used a mix of physical restraints and drug treatments to keep patients conscious during operations, preventing them from moving or escaping. These methods allowed him to perform long surgeries that could go on for weeks or months. He made slow, planned changes to the brain and recorded every result. Thomas Beckwith, a 34-year-old mill worker from Brandenburg, had gone to Sullivan looking for relief from chronic back pain. He lived but with limited brain function. He explained that Sullivan had promised to end his pain through changes to the nervous system, but instead spent months damaging different parts of it to study how pain was sent and understood. He said regular doctors just cover up symptoms. Beckwith wrote, but his way could stop pain forever by changing how the brain reacts. Every time I thought it was the last surgery, he would say he needed to test something else. Look at another area. I knew then he wasn't helping me. He was using me to learn how the brain handles pain. The third survivor, 17-year-old Elizabeth Harden from Owensboro, had been brought to Sullivan by her parents. They hoped he could treat her bouts of deep sadness. Her statement revealed that Sullivan was especially interested in younger patients because their brains could survive procedures that would have killed older people. Elizabeth's written report included descriptions of watching Sullivan do similar tests on others while discussing his thought-changing emotions and fixing personalities. He told me sadness and fear were just brain errors, she wrote, and that they could be fixed with the right surgery. He thought he could create people who'd never feel bad emotions and who would be perfect members of society. Margaret Sullivan, the doctor's own daughter, presented the most complicated case for both doctors and investigators. Dr. Fitzgerald's review showed that Sullivan had performed many brain surgeries on her over several years. These surgeries had deeply changed her brain and nervous system in ways medical experts could not undo or fully understand. Margaret Sullivan may be the most extreme case of brain change ever recorded. Fitzgerald told the court. He explained that Sullivan had used his daughter as a long-term test subject, slowly removing emotional and mental reactions while keeping a thinking ability and physical movement. The result was a person who could think and move like others, but who lacked the normal emotional sense that helped guide right and wrong. Margaret's testimony gave the clearest picture of Sullivan's research process. But because of her changed mind, she spoke about terrible acts in a calm and matter-of-fact way. She didn't seem to know that what she described were crimes. "Father began changing how I felt when I was around 8, she said in an emotionless voice. At first, it was to take away pain and worry so I could help her better in the lab. Later, he removed emotions that could get in the way of research, like feeling sorry for patients or questioning the experiments." Her account showed that Sullivan had created someone who could take part in torture and death without feeling the kind of horror or guilt others would. Margaret had helped tie down patients, watch their vitals during surgeries, and handled their bodies afterward, all while thinking of it as just normal medical work. The trial against Dr. Sullivan lasted over 8 months. During that time, the court heard about crimes that pushed the limits of the law, the planned nature of his work, the long-term pain of his victims, and the smart ways he avoided being caught all made this case unlike any other. His defense lawyer claimed that Sullivan wasn't evil, just overly driven by curiosity and science. This forced the court to ask, can medical experiments be counted as murder, even when done by someone with a real medical license? Sullivan never said he was sorry. During his time in court, he explained his methods and said his findings were worth the cost. He seemed angry that the legal system was slowing down what he saw as important medical progress. "The people in my studies helped move human knowledge forward," he said during his final remarks. "What they went through will save lives in the future. They gave more than anyone else for science." The jury found him guilty of 87 first-degree murders. It became one of the largest serial murder cases in U.S. history. The judge sentenced him to death. Before his execution, Sullivan used his final months to write long memoirs about his work. He hoped future researchers would pick up where he left off. These writings, filling over 400 pages in careful handwriting, offered even more proof of how thoroughly he planned and carried out his crimes. He had kept records on every victim, including how they were found, what surgeries were done, and what results came from each test. Detailed financial records showed steady payments to different suppliers across the region. These businesses had provided chemicals, surgical tools, and other supplies necessary for Dr. Sullivan's research activities. His letters revealed links to medical supply companies in cities like Louisville, Cincinnati, Baltimore, and even as far as New York. This indicated that his work had required help from people who might have known, or at least guessed, the real nature of what he was doing. Some of the items delivered to him were not things a small-town doctor would normally need, raising concerns about whether others had knowingly helped him carry out his crimes. Investigators also learned that Sullivan had been writing to doctors and medical researchers throughout the country. He would share parts of his experimental findings, but never explained how he gathered his data. Some letters hinted that other doctors were doing similar experiments, bringing up troubling thoughts about how common this kind of behavior might have been in the medical field. Federal agents expanded their investigation to include other doctors who had written to Sullivan or ordered similar supplies. This wider probe revealed at least 3 other physicians who seemed to be doing illegal experiments on their patients. suggesting Sullivan's operation might have been part of a bigger, hidden pattern of medical abuse. Dr. Edmund Forrester, based in Nashville, had exchanged letters with Sullivan regularly and had bought the same kinds of lab tools and chemicals. When officials searched Forrester's clinic, they found preserved human organs and surgical journals that hinted at unauthorized autopsies and possibly live experiments on patients. Dr. William Chandler in Lexington had received detailed letters from Sullivan describing how he altered brain functions. Records from Chandler's clinic showed a strangely high number of deaths among patients who had come in for basic treatments. His practice was shut down while under review, though he passed away from a heart attack before any formal charges could be brought against him. The most shocking discovery involved Dr. Harrison Blackstone from Louisville. His letters to Sullivan talked about ways to improve brain function using surgery. Blackstone ran a private mental hospital that offered treatment for psychological and neurological issues. Patients came from all over Kentucky and Indiana. At first glance, Blackstone's operation appeared above board. Families were kept informed of treatment updates, and there weren't any obvious signs of harm. But once his records were studied closely, a different picture emerged. Many patients had undergone several surgeries, not to cure them, but seemingly to test theories. The procedures didn't match the medical issues they came in for. This led authorities to believe that Sullivan was not working alone, but was part of a secret group of doctors using their professional status to carry out illegal experiments. No one ever figured out exactly how large this network was, but the evidence suggested it was much more widespread than anyone had guessed. Margaret Sullivan, the doctor's daughter, spent the rest of her life at the Kentucky State Hospital for the Insane. Doctors there tried to understand what her father had done to her brain. The hospital's lead physician, Dr. Samuel Patterson, brought in experts from different universities to study her and to find ways to treat others who had suffered similar procedures. Margaret's case was unlike anything doctors had seen before. Dr. Patterson explained that her father's surgeries had removed her ability to feel normal emotions. Though her memory and thinking skills were still intact, she could recall surgeries in detail and perform complex tasks, but she didn't seem to understand why her actions could be seen as wrong. Margaret lived until 1903. She never showed normal emotional behavior, but at times she gave doctors important clues about how the brain works. Her case helped move forward early brain research and became a warning of how science could be twisted for evil purposes. The building that housed the Sullivan Medical Institute was destroyed in a fire in March 1847. Residents said that the basement lab was especially hard to burn, likely due to the chemical substances Sullivan had used. The fire burned with strange colors and let off poisonous smoke that forced the town to evacuate. Even after the fire, the land stayed dangerous. The chemicals used in the lab had soaked into the soil, stopping plants from growing and making people sick if they stayed near for too long. The town later banned building on the land, calling it unsafe. Families of Sullivan's victims had to deal with another layer of heartbreak. His detailed records showed exactly what he had done to their loved ones. Parents, spouses, and siblings were able to read step-by-step accounts of surgeries and other cruel procedures. Many chose to move away, unable to live in a town where people had once praised the man who hurt their families. Being linked to the Sullivan scandal brought shame, especially for those who had trusted him. Samuel Turner, a riverboat captain, whose son David was one of Sullivan's victims, dedicated his life to fighting for better medical laws. He gave emotional speeches to Kentucky lawmakers, pushing for stricter rules around medical testing and requiring doctors to report deaths. "My son believed in Dr. Sullivan because he was desperate for help and because our community trusted him," Turner said. "We must make sure that no other family goes through what we did. Doctors must be held accountable." In response, the Kentucky State Medical Board passed new rules. These laws required that all experimental treatments be approved by a review board and that doctors report any human testing. These changes became examples for other states and helped shape today's medical ethics guidelines. However, the full details of Sullivan's methods were hidden in locked state files for over 100 years. Officials said they feared that sharing the techniques publicly might encourage copycats or allow dangerous doctors to misuse the information. Millbrook, the town where all of this took place, never fully recovered. The scandal chased away new residents and businesses. People moved out, and by 1860, most buildings on Main Street were empty. The town's population dropped below 200. The land where the Sullivan Institute had stood stayed empty for decades. Even with multiple cleanup efforts, nothing would grow there. Animals avoided it. Locals reported strange smells, weird sounds, and a constant feeling of discomfort when near the site. Whether these were real effects or just psychological reactions, they helped build eerie legends about the place and stopped anyone from trying to rebuild on the land. The Sullivan case showed how easy it can be for someone with authority and charm to hide dark secrets. Sullivan took advantage of families' hopes, poor communication systems of the time, and the lack of strict medical rules. He was able to carry out crimes for almost 20 years without being caught. The case also highlighted how a respected position can protect someone from suspicion. Because Sullivan was seen as a trustworthy doctor, families were afraid to question his actions. They didn't want to challenge someone so well regarded in the community. Modern historians now study the Sullivan case to understand how dangerous the medical field can become without proper checks. It led to the creation of important medical practices we use today, like informed consent, ethical review boards, and strict research rules. Experts who studied Sullivan during his trial also created some of the earliest psychological profiles of criminals who can appear normal while doing terrible things. Criminologists and psychologists learned from his case how some people manage to commit long-term crimes without showing signs of guilt. This disturbing story teaches us how risky it is to trust powerful figures without requiring them to be transparent. It shows how easily desperate people can become victims when those they turn to for help misuse their power. The Sullivan case is a reminder that a good reputation does not equal good morals, and that strong rules and oversight are essential to protect people from those who might take advantage of their trust. Do you think everything about this story was uncovered? Or could other doctors have picked up where Sullivan left off, continuing his secret work? The facts suggest that Sullivan wasn't the only one. How many others might have slipped through the cracks? Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us what you think about this dark moment in American medical history. If you like this story and want more creepy historical tales, don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share with someone who loves mysterious horror. We'll see you in the next video.